Hey guys, Charlie Murphy here, recording another session of $1, $2 no-limit 6-max tables, regular speed tables on Ignition. Our games are up and running, so let's jump right in. Lower right-hand table, we're going to go ahead and tag this guy as a recreational player. He's playing on 50 blinds and open, limping in middle position. It's a pretty good indicator that he is not a serious regular. And we'll check range after checking in from the big blind on the Jack 5-4 two-tone board. We have a little bit of equity and nobody's showing any desire to be involved in this pot, so we're going to go ahead and stab with our gut shot. I'd like it better with a heart blocker or a higher straight draw. But I think it's okay to stab here in a limp pot where nobody's showing any desire to be involved in the pot. And against that raise, even the small raise, we'll just go ahead and fold. Upper right-hand table will open Queen-Jack offsuit from middle position. Or I'm sorry, from the cutoff. Recreational player limps this time under the gun. We can go ahead and complete our small blind with ace-9 offsuit. Probably continuing with 40 to 45% of hands, isolating the top 12% or so and completing the small blind with the rest. Could maybe talk me into going wider because this player seems to be a little bit on the weak side. Upper left-hand table, small blind, limps in, blind on blind. We'll go ahead and isolate with pocket eights. Isolate something like a button raise first in range, 40 to 45%. Lower right-hand table with the 4 straight, we're just going to go ahead and check. We're not really trying to fold out any kind of 2 pairs or straights. We're not really trying to get value from very much, so I'm just content to check that hand that's got some showdown value. Upper left-hand table, we'll go ahead and range bet small on the King-8 deuce rainbow board. And against the almost 2x pot overbet, I'm just going to go ahead and fold my top pair on the 4 straight board against the rec. Upper left-hand table is interesting. We can have 8s, deuces, and various good trip kings, or King-8 and King-deuce suited. Lots of good trip kings. We can also have some flush draws. I don't really want to bet too many marginal 1-pair hands. It's just going to be trip, most of my trip kings are better, as well as my underfools. I think I would trap with the quad kings at that point. Given that I'm not betting too much, I'm going to be betting a pretty polarized range. Those super strong hands, trips are better, plus flush draws. I'm going to go ahead and use an overbet size. If he's got a king, I'm probably never going to have him get away from this, so I want to get that pot juiced up to really punish him with my full house. He quickly calls the turn overbet as well. I think there's a very good chance he has some kind of king in his range, and as long as it's not King-10, King-deuce, or perhaps that last straight combo of King-8, I'm going to get paid off. Given that I've got such a polarized range here, once again, it's still going to be, my 8's full, my deuce is full, or, King-10, King-8, King-deuce. And some other good trip kings like ace-king, king-queen, king-jack. I'm going to be using an overbet size. I want to just use the all-in size here for a little over 2x pot. Just going to go ahead and jam him all in with my 8's full and expect to get snapped off by trip kings. I don't see how he ever folds a king, especially in a blind-on-blind situation. And I think my follow-through could be, my bluffs would probably have to be some whiffed heart draws with best removal to good kings that call down. So I think I would probably use hands like Queen-Jack of suited, Queen-Jack of hearts, not Queen-10 because it's got a pair now. I can show that hand down. It's got some showdown value, but probably hands like Queen-Jack, Queen-9, Jack-9 of hearts. Those kind of hands I think make my best bluffs there to go with my good trips and boats. Upper right-hand table, suspected recreational player with about 60 blinds, limps under the gun. We're going to go ahead and isolate him up from the cutoff. use like a roughly 21-22% range, something like our middle position raise first in range, which will include our suited aces like ace-5 suited, and it folds around. We pick up the pot pre-flop. Upper right-hand table, we open blind on blind for 3x with 10-jack offsuit. That's a standard open, but facing the 3-bet in position, I think it's fine to just go ahead and fold that. I'm not going to call too many offsuit hands against a 3-bet out of position. Maybe ace-queen offsuit, you could talk me into it, but I'm mostly going to be 4-betting. I'm mostly going to be continuing against the 3-bet with a call with hands like suited broadways, suited connectors, and middle pairs. I'll 4-bet and call off with hands like 10s plus there, maybe even 9s, as well as ace-king. Ace-queen is close. I think I probably just want to call with the ace-queen suited, maybe use ace-queen offsuit as a 4-bet bluff out of position. On that same table, upper right-hand table, suspected recreational player with 80-some blinds, open limps the cutoff. We isolate with a roughly 27-28% range from the button, including king-jack offsuit. We get called, and we get a 10-5 deuce rainbow flop. He bets into us for half pot. I'm content to go ahead and peel this one time with my overcards and my various backdoor straight draws, so I think it's okay to peel the flop lead one time just because that's not inherently strong, especially for a somewhat smaller size, and given that I've got lots of backdoor equity and overcards that can get in there, and I did hit my king, so I'm pretty happy about that. Upper right-hand table, a 2.5x open from the button. The player's been tight, but not through too many orbits so far. King 8's about the bottom of my defense range for a 2.5x button raise first in when I'm on the big blind. Given that I do have some inclination this player's been tight, he's only raised one hand so far out of 12 opportunities. I'm going to go ahead and make a slightly tight fold and deviate ever so cautiously towards the more tight side there. If I didn't think this guy was on the tight side, I would go ahead and call that as kind of the bottom of my calling defense range in that button versus big blind single raise pot scenario. We face another turn bet, this time for about 40% of pot. When we've got top pair, nothing to do but go ahead and call that and take a river, evaluate based on what he does on the river. I'm mostly going to be either value betting or calling down a bet based on what he does to me here. A very large bet, he might scare me away, just as recreational players don't tend to be very bluffy in their overbet sizes. Now he's gone ahead and checked to me. I think I want to try to get value from some kind of 10x hand, or some kind of middling pair, or even a hand like ace-5 that took a weird fishy double donk line and now checks the river. I'm just not that concerned he ever has me beat when he takes that kind of weak line and checks the river. I don't want to use an overbet size here. I want to let these more marginal hands that I think make up a large portion of his range call. So I'm going to use a roughly 70% or 2/3 type size and try to get some value with my turn top pair. Lower right-hand table, we can fold against the cutoff 2x raise first in. You could maybe have some flats in the small blind against a min raise. I don't do that too much, but it's justifiable against such a small sizing. 9-5 suited is not really going to be in consideration for a 3-bet or a call, though, even with the small sizing in play. Upper left-hand table, we get a suspected recreational player, limps middle position. We'll go ahead and isolate with something like a 22% range. Lower left-hand table, the cutoff raises first in. We'll 3-bet a standard 3-bet range. I believe that's going to be about a 10% scenario. It's going to include ace-king offsuit. Lower right-hand table, we raise first in from the cutoff with king-jack suited. We get donked into half pot on that Jack 9-7 rainbow board. Nothing to do but go ahead and flat call that. Upper left-hand table, we have a set against this guy again. I'm going to go ahead and range bet him on the small side. We get double donked into by suspected rec now on that Jack 9-7-9 two-tone board. We've got top pair. We don't really want to be raising with our top pair. We're also very happy to call, having picked up backdoor flush draw with the heart, so I'm just going to go ahead and call it a second time. Upper left-hand table is interesting with that spade or the club peeling on the turn, third club. I do think I want to get value, but I don't want to use an overbet size, so I'm going to go ahead and use a 2/3 size with my set. Lower right-hand table with the pairs on the flop, double pairing. I think I just want to go ahead and show this down and check it back. I don't want to run into a 7 or 9 that played in a weird way but now has a full house. I guess I could get called by some hands like Jack Queen, Jack 10, but I think that's a smaller part of his range. It's kind of close, but I'll take my showdown here and not bet him. And he had Ace King, just 2 overcards. Lower left-hand table, we went and opened the button with Ace-9 offsuit. We get called by the big blind on Ace-King-3 rainbow. We'll range bet small. Lower right-hand table, we're going to open middle position with King-5 suited. The 4 flush peeling off on the upper left-hand table, I'm just going to check my set down and hope he didn't back into some kind of club. He had King-Queen offsuit for the turn top pair that was actually drawing dead against my set. So I'm okay with the way we play that. I think we got as much value as possible. No reason to try to value bet against a suspected recreational player that's been limping and taking some kind of odd lines post-flop on that 4 flush board. Lower right-hand table, we get called by that recreational player from his small blind with an 8-5 deuce 2-tone flop. He checks to us. I'll go ahead and range bet small. Against a reg, I would put his range very specifically on middle pairs and suited broadways. Given that this guy's a recreational player, I think his range is going to be a lot wider and not obviously be so condensed and defined. Deuce on the turn, we've got that second pair now with, the 8 beats us on the flop. The bottom pair is now trips. We could charge some flush draws. We could get check raised off by better hands. I can also have him, show up at the river with some weird overcards that check called the flop and have to bluff the river. So there's some bluff catching merit to this hand as well. I'm content to check this one back and play the river, most likely bluff catching. I'd rather it wasn't a jack. A jack could be in his range. However, fish are pretty bluffy on the river, especially on these kind of low flop boards. Let me think what I want to do here. I'm pretty sure this should be a call. That 2/3 size is fairly bluffy. The check call, check bet line also more so. A Broadway River overcard also tends to be a bit more bluffy. A paired turn card, let me see, that also tends to be a bit more bluffy. I think this is an easy call, even though we are sometimes beat. Yeah, and we've snapped off a busted straight draw, which is also a very reasonable hand to have in his range on the flop, either as a call or a check raise. Upper left-hand table, we checked the big blind in against a limper and a small blind completer. We checked our range on 6 deuce deuce rainbow, and 8 turn. It pops up. It checks to us again. I'm going to go ahead and start stabbing. I don't necessarily fold out better hands like pairs, but I think I'm going to just pick up that pot so often when no one shows any interest and that texture doesn't coordinate with so many hands. Any 2 cards, 9 through ace, that make up these guys' range have no pair and for the most part no real draw as well, except for just naked overcards. So I'm content to stab at that. Facing that pretty quick and healthy size raise from the recreational player that limped and is now showing aggression on the turn, I'm content to go ahead and fold that, but I do like the turn stab even though it didn't work. And he picked up top pair, so he was protecting that top pair, probably overplaying it a bit much for that quick raise for that size. But that's not an uncommon wave to play for what I believe to be a recreational player just based on the fact that he open limped. And we're also tagging him. Wait, no, he didn't open limp. He actually just open posted, and he's got a full stack. I'm not going to call him a wreck quite yet, but we're going to keep an eye on this guy. Perhaps I'll give him a weak reg or suspected fish type tag in the meantime until we know a bit more about this guy so we don't forget that what he's done and what he's shown us thus far, but not jumping to any kind of conclusions too quickly. Our friend, the recreational player, just left on the upper left-hand table that we had direct position on. That's unfortunate, especially since he's shown some ability to tangle with us and, call down a couple of flop and turn barrels when we happen to have some sets or full houses. So that's a fun guy to be in position with. I was very happy to have him at the table while he was there. Take inventory on these other tables. Upper right-hand table, have a rec to our direct right. That's a good start. These guys don't seem to be fishy or weak. They seem like regs or nitty regs based on their stats so far. Same with the seat 3 directly across from us. 2 seats been awfully loose through 14 hands through the first 2 to 3 orbits, playing 43-36. So he may be playing too many hands, but he hasn't been limpy, hasn't been passive. So he's probably not a fish. He might just be an overly aggressive reg. But we'll keep an eye on him. But we're happy to have this table with the confirmed recreational player playing 64-14 with 43% limps over 14 hands to our immediate right. Nice, he just picked up a small little pot there to juice a stack up in the meantime, too. Well, we've got immediate position on him. Let's see, lower right-hand table has a couple of recs playing 67-8 with limps and 53-18 with limps. That table makes me happy based on that so far. We're not going to isolate the upper right-hand table's limper with a hand as weak as 10-5 suited, although I might have considered opening it from the button just because the buttons haven't been particularly loose or aggressive thus far. Might have expanded my range ever so slightly to include that hand that's a bit outside of a button standard open, but pretty close. The pool also as a whole tends to be a bit too passive from the blinds and lets you get away with more button opens than you should. So it's okay to expand your range to some extent beyond what a solver would recommend. Upper left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and raise first in from under the gun with roughly a 17% range, including ace-queen offsuit. Probably go down to about ace-10 offsuit, king-jack offsuit, and the offsuit hands. Most, if not all, of our pairs are suited aces and then suited cards 9 or higher. Something like that. You could mix in a few more suited kings or suited connectors and dump some small pairs if you would prefer to do that instead. Not too sure on the fish status of this upper left-hand table, so we may be shuffling that one out now that our buddy left 3 seat through us a couple minutes ago. Lower left-hand table. Players to my immediate left and right seem like regs on reg-type stats, as well as the seat 2. The 1 seat's playing 55-45 through 11 hands. He may be loose, wacky, aggressive, and spazzy, so we'll keep an eye on him in the meantime, too. But 2 tables that we have some confirmed recs or confirmed fish playing with us, so we'll definitely keep those. Maybe consider shuffling out one or both of the 2 left-hand tables at this point. Upper right-hand table will open ace-10 offsuit from middle position. Lower left-hand table will open jack-7 suited from the cutoff. Both of those are pretty standard opens. We get a button limp on the lower right-hand table from the new player, so perhaps that's a recreational player. We're not going to complete our small blind with the hand as weak as queen-7 offsuit, but we are going to keep an eye on this guy. That might even be our recreational player friend that was at the table then left. He might have tried to load up a new table and came back to the same one. So we'll definitely keep an eye on this table in the meantime. I was considering shuffling that one out because nobody else seems too fishy or recreational type. But for now, we'll keep it, having seen that limp, which is a telltale indicator that somebody is not a serious regular player. Upper right-hand table against the small blind 3-bet to 4x, we can just go ahead and fold our ace-10 offsuit. There's no reason to get involved with the hand that's easily dominated by reasonable 3-bet ranges, isn't suited so it can make some kind of strong flushes. I think it's okay to just fold that one, especially against a fairly standard 4x type sizing. I don't really normally call from the big blind when there's a limper and isolation raise, but it's a weak limper and then a weak isolating player that only goes to 2x. I'm getting 4.5 to 1. I'm going to go ahead and sneak in here with this king-9 offsuit just because the players are weak. This guy is probably not going to limp re-raise too often. And I'm going to get a good price and get a chance to take a flop against 2 players that I think are probably pretty weak. However, having not really picked up very much, just a king-high overcard and backdoor flush draw, I'm just going to go ahead and check fold against that half-pot lead from the other recreational player. But I do think it's fine to try to sneak into that pot as played, just because the size that this guy used to isolate was way too small, just a min-raise over a limp. And my price was so damn good, I think it justifies getting in there. Lower left-hand table, 5-3 offsuit is not a standard open, and the player in the small blind has been pretty loose and aggressive, 44-38 over 16 hands with 40% 3-bets, 2 out of 5, and some aggressive post-flop tendencies as well. I'm not going to expand my range under the circumstances. I'll just go ahead and fold that weak hand. Upper left-hand table, a recreational player limps. I will isolate out of my blinds with ace-10 offsuit. That's going to be near the bottom of my isolation range, probably using about a 12% range to isolate there. Ace-10 offsuit or better, king-jack offsuit or better, pairs 8 or higher. Suited broadways and suited 9x type hands would be fairly standard. You could maybe mix in a few more suited cards, suited connected cards, hands like queen-jack, king-10 offsuit, or a few more pairs. Against that big blind 3-bet, though, I am just going to go ahead and fold. This is one of the worst hands in my isolation range. Can't really 4-bet and fold against that size, so I would be playing 4-bet all in, fold, or call. In ace-10 offsuit, it's going to be a fold candidate with those 3 choices. Lower left-hand table, king-10 offsuit will open from middle position. And I'm going to shuffle this table out without any obvious fish at the table and an aggressive player in position versus me. So this will be our last hand at this table. We'll replace it with another one. We get donked into by a small blind defense for full pot on 9-4-3 rainbow. That strong sizing, it makes me more inclined, or the large sizing rather, makes me more inclined to believe that it's strong. This guy's playing full stack, so he might be a reg. Which would make his range more narrowly defined towards pocket pairs and suited broadways, of which he either has a set, some kind of pair, or even an overpair if he has a hand like tens or jacks that didn't 3-bet. I don't have any reason to float here with just overcards, no real backdoor draws, except for, the 9-10 king. I guess I could pick up some backdoor gut shots. I'd rather have backdoor flush draw to go with it if I'm going to consider floating. I would still call with my pairs of nines, ace-9, king-9, Queen 9, Jack 9, 10, 9 suited, those sort of hands, as well as my sets, my overpairs, and some overcards with backdoor flush draws. But King 10, I think, is weak enough that I can just fold it, especially against a pot-sized lead. I also don't know if that guy is really a recreational player from calling in the small blind and donk betting the flop, or if he's a reg because he's playing full stacked. Given that uncertainty, and the regs tend to be a bit stronger when they lead out than the fish are, and the fish also tend to be stronger for that large sizing, so I think it's okay to go ahead and fold there, especially when my hand is already pretty weak and I've got no real reason to be all that certain that that guy's play is weak, or that guy's range is weak. Lower right-hand table, that was the suspected weak reg or fish min raises. We also get the fishy player calling in the small blind. 2x raise first in, even though we are going to defend an awful lot from our big blind for such a price. A hand like Jack Deuce offsuit that really just has such weak equity against almost anything is not going to be a hand we continue with, even for that price. I'm really just looking to flop trip deuces or jacks and deuces kind of thing, which, that's not the best way to approach poker. Even for a price that good, I think I'm still supposed to fold. Solver defense ranges, even against something like a 30% raise first in for a min raise, does not include a hand like Jack Deuce. In fact, it's not even close. And we generally get tighter than we would otherwise with the small blind player in that pot, even though he's fishy, just because there's another player that's going to sort of cut into our equity post-flop and make it harder to realize if he starts betting the raise in as well. So I typically get tighter, with that overcaller in there, which would make Jack Deuce even further away from a defense. So I'm happy to fold that and go on to the next hand. I don't think it's all that close. We've got a new table here. All pretty full stacks. I'm not sure that table is going to be that weak. Let's see here. 2x raise first in, and then we got some squeezes going on. I'm going to shuffle this one out, keep looking for something that's a bit more obviously full of recreational players before I give up and take something that appears more reg-heavy with the full stacks right off the bat. My other tables all have at least one more or less confirmed recreational player, so there seems to be a lot in the pool right now. I can probably find a table with more of them as well, just based on what I'm seeing at the other tables, so I'm going to keep looking for those guys, as those guys are the ones who make most of my money, as opposed to the weaker regs who, well, by no means are world beaters. They're not that tough. They're not making nearly as many or as large mistakes as the fish and the recreational players are. So we want those guys at our table first and foremost. Lower right-hand table, recreational player limps middle position. The small blind completes. We will check in with our King 7 offsuit on the big blind. Then we're going to be checking range, assuming it checks to us on the on the 7-6 deuce rainbow board. Not necessarily all that worried. This hand is not good at this point with top pair second kicker. The 6 is not great because now a 6 is ahead of us with trips and we're drawing extremely thin. However, I can still get value from worse 7s that didn't bet the flop, various straight draws and our flush draws picked up on the turn. I can either charge or fold out overcards with a lot of equity that don't want to call a bet. I think it's good to go ahead and bet this here. Plus, nobody's shown too much interest on that flop, so I'm not that worried that this hand is really beat all that often. Upper left-hand table, a tight player opens the button for 2.5x. I'm going to defend a bit tighter because he's been so tight, but I will still call against the 2.5x raise first in with a hand like King 4 suited. Lower right-hand table against the min raise, I'm just going to go ahead and call with that 7 and then check the river to him. I probably won't be calling a large bet against a recreational player that plays his hands pretty face up and probably has a 6. But I am not just going to fold to that min raise on the turn. Against that overbet, though, overbets are not very bluffy. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold that, especially when he showed some aggression by raising the turn, even if small. Upper right-hand table, we get a small 1/3 pot bet, probably a range bet. We have backdoor straight draws, backdoor flush draws, and an overcard, good removal to king-queen with our king blocker. I'm going to go ahead and put in a check raise and be barreling. You know, if I pick up a 3 or various heart draws on the turn, I think that's fine to go ahead and take a stab at that small bet, especially when the small bet probably has so many weak hands and so many merged hands in there that we can fold out and pick up that pot right there more often than we should. After the small flop bet, the check raise tends to be more successful than against a 70% flop bet or even a 50% flop bet. So that also is factoring into my decision to go ahead and check raise bluff with that, you know, on its face, fairly weak hand that I was sitting on. Lower right-hand table, ace-3 offsuit is kind of near the cusp of a standard open. We've got a passive fish in the big blind, so I'm happy to play extra pots. I'm going to go ahead and make a slightly loose button open. Upper left-hand table, under the gun, raises first in. We also have the cutoff caller. I'd be squeezing fairly liberally here, about as wide as I would 3-bet the under the gun open player. I'd have some suited wheel aces in there, but I don't think I would have them all. I would probably use ace-5 and ace-4 suited to 3-bet or squeeze against this guy, against this situation. Ace-3 I will just put in the muck, though it is pretty close. Got a new table with the player sitting on 60 blinds, almost certainly a recreational player. I got a couple open seats that could be filled in, 2 full stacks as well, but I think we've waited long enough for an obviously fishy table and do have one shorter stack, likely rec at this table right here, so we'll go ahead and put it into the rotation. Thinking back about that limp pot where I folded King 7 against the recreational player who min-raised the turn, then overbet the river small. Let me take a look and think about a few more things in that situation, though I am pretty comfortable that folding that is reasonable. The overbets start to get pretty bluff or pretty under bluff from fish. I'm also going to take a look at what they do in a check raise bet line. The check raise bet line is heavily under bluffed as well. I think I'm going to just be shown some kind of janky 6x trip sixes hand there so often against a player who's, almost certainly a passive fish playing 73-9. He does have some aggressive post-flop tendencies. But I'm just not that willing to give that guy credit for playing a bluff in that line when recreational players in fish are just not that bluffy for overbet sizes and not that bluffy in a check raise bet, post-flop line as well. I think going ahead and folding that king 7 is the move, and it's probably not even that close, even though I do have pretty good showdown value. And in a vacuum, it's a pretty decent bluff catcher, as I don't really block any of the club draws or straight draws he in theory could have. I just think I'm going to be shown value so often there, there's no need to bluff catch and start getting into theoretical decisions about which hands make the right bluff catchers. If they underbluff, you fold all your bluff catchers. There's no reason to worry about which ones you call, and that's what I think is going on in that situation. Upper right-hand table, we raise the middle position first in with ace-jack suited. A standard reg-type player on the aggressive side, 3-bets us. He's playing 29-23, or 27-23 over 26 hands. He's also 3-bet 1 out of 11. He's now 3-bet 2 out of 12. He's pretty aggressive. Against the player pool as a whole, I would not be calling this. Given that I think this guy is sufficiently aggressive, I'm going to drop into more of a GTO defense range. It will include a few more hands than I would as a standard defense, and I will actually go ahead and call with the ace-jack suited. I'm probably calling with hands like pocket tens, ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, king-jack, the suited versions of all those, and I'm probably 4-betting jacks or better against a guy that I think's a bit more aggressive to stack off with, as well as my ace-king. Ace-queen offsuit can be my bluff in such a situation. As well as probably a suited wheel ace, like maybe ace-5 suited, to go ahead and balance my jacks. I would 4-bet fold the ace-5 suited and the ace-queen offsuit. Having picked up this flush draw here, I think the move is just going to be to kind of raise up with my tens, or any other, if my pocket tens, or if I didn't 4-bet pocket jacks, I can raise those to get those in. I can go ahead and raise to call off with the ace-jack suited, and I can also raise, my backdoor flush draws, my ace-queen, ace-jack, king-queen, king-jack with the club versions to have some raise folds in my range on the flop. The turn comes down with the 6. I just hit the nuts. I would slow down with my tens. I would slow down with my backdoor club draws that didn't get there, and I think I will go ahead and trap with my flushes that I made, especially the ace-high flush. So I'm just going to go ahead and check. Let's see. We isolated against a poster with 9s from middle position on the lower left-hand table. Upper left-hand table, middle position, raise first in, and we can fold our small blind with king-queen off. So I think it's a bit too weak to 3-bet from the small blind against an earlier position open. Upper left-hand table, we'll raise first in with jack-7 suited on the button. I don't really want to do any kind of check calling with anything else here at this point. I just want to check jam my flushes and get his overpairs, especially those with a spade, to pay me off. I think my 10-10 with the spade might also play this way, just because I don't want to check call with the 10. So I'm going to go ahead and check raise this all in. Force him to put his money in, not give him a chance to check call back the river. And he is sitting on quad 9s. I like the way he played that once he hits it, honestly. It forces me to do all kinds of silly things with weaker hands. Granted, my hand was not weak. It was the ace-high flush draw in a 3-bet pot, so I'm not going anywhere in that situation for 100 blinds. But I like the way he played it once he 3-bets his 9s and flops quads. I think that's pretty reasonable as well, especially the flop trap. The flop trap was very good. No reason to raise me back when I check raise. Because if he flats me, he gives me a chance to bluff off with my spade draws on the turn if I brick, or bluff off with my club draws if I pick up backdoor clubs on the turn. So I like the way he played that very much, even though he stacked me, which I, of course, don't like. I do like his play from an objective standpoint. I think he played it well. And I got my money in drawing dead, thinking I'm jamming, a super strong lock type hand. So it happens sometimes. I think we played that hand just fine, though. Lower right-hand table, recreational player limps middle position. We'd be isolating him plenty, roughly a 22% range, but not including hands as weak as Queen 4 suited. We'll just have far too many hands in our isolation range if we start using things like that. Lower left-hand table, middle position limps. Again, we'll isolate with something like a low 20% range, something like our middle position raise first in range. Ace-King offsuit is, of course, strong enough to be using for that. Lower left or upper left-hand table, 9-8 offsuit is right around the cusp of a standard open. In fact, it's even in the standard open, so I'm just going to go ahead and raise with that. I'd probably expand my range against these blinds. Maybe not too much. They've been reasonably aggressive, but I think I would expand my range some. The recreational player limp calls, then donks into us for 4 blinds into a 10-blind pot. We've got ace-king high and 2 overcards, backdoor gut shots to Broadway. I think it's okay to peel here and float once and try to hit an overcard, try to hit some kind of straight draw, or maybe even just check my ace high down. Once again, he bets 4, this time into 17 with 2 overcards and ace-king high. Again, nothing to do but go ahead and call that. He often is going to have some kind of pair that's beating me, some kind of jack-X, some kind of middling pocket pair, but I still have equity, against a lot of that range. I can hit top pair, top kicker to be good most of the time, or I can maybe even check down if he gives up. When he overbet jams the river for 32 into 25 and I'm sitting on ace-king high, I'm of course just going to go ahead and fold. I do have the nut flush blocker. That's not too relevant against his range, but I would also have the backdoor nut flushes that came in, which I would of course be happy to call off with here. But I'm just going to go ahead and fold the ace-king. That strong sizing almost makes me wonder if he was hitting a 6 the way he played that, because that's also very possible for a recreational fishy player to play like that as well, then try to get the rest of the money in on the river. I would have liked a larger turn size if that's what he had, but these guys don't really think those things through that far. Players that are limp calling and donk betting are not going to be thinking about what's the most optimal bet size to use based on different board textures and different perceived range versus range situations. So I can't really expect that from a player like this here, even if it's what I would recommend doing. Upper left-hand table we're going to shuffle out as it's pretty reg heavy. King 10 offsuit's probably just outside my standard under the gun open range, and given that it's reg heavy and the regs have for the most part shown some fairly aggressive tendencies in position, I'm going to go ahead and not expand my range or not open the hand that's kind of close and just go ahead and fold that one. Upper right-hand table, we get a recreational player limps under the gun. The button isolates to 4x. Another rec calls in the small blind. I'm going to be treating this mostly like a cold 4-bet or fold situation using a large sizing, something like 22 blinds. I can probably stack off with jacks or better against the button isolating player. I have to be a bit cautious about which hands I raise to raise fold, just because the player with 55 blinds could jam all in as well, and it's going to force me to call off with a lot of the hands that I do that with. So I'm not really going to want to raise fold too many bluffs. I'll be a bit tighter than I otherwise would be with my bluffs. Just use hands like ace-queen suited, ace-queen offsuit, maybe ace-jack, ace-10 suited. A few of the hands I don't mind calling off that are likely ahead against whatever stuff he sort of spaz jams against me some portion of the time. But I think that's the way to do it. 9-7 suited is just going to be too weak to consider having in there, even without this guy being so short and potentially prone to jamming. Yeah, if I went something like a 50-50 ratio of raise call to raise fold hands in that spot, I'd have jacks plus ace king to stack off with. I'd have tens and ace queen in there, as well as ace jack, ace 10, king queen, and king jack, the suited versions. And I'd be calling off against this guy if he jammed with not just jacks plus ace king, but also the ace queens and the tens, and probably even the ace jack and ace 10 type suited for the price I'm getting. The king high ones maybe can be a fold, and even that's pretty close. I might have to just call off everything against a guy like that because he could be jamming with everything, and the price I'm being laid is just so good. Lower right-hand table, we raise first in from the button with ace-jack offsuit for a 2.5x. We get 3-bet by an aggressive regular player, so I'm going to treat this like a GTO defense spot. I'm not really going to be calling ace-jack here, but it might be in my 4-bet range. Let me think about this for a minute. Against the GTO 4-bet player, I'm going to just go ahead and use ace-jack offsuit as my 4-bet bluff. 4-bet to call off with jacks plus ace-king, and probably put a few middling suited aces not quite good enough to call the 3-bet with, like ace-8, ace-7, ace-6 in the 4-bet bluff range. Probably be calling my other suited aces, including the suited wheel aces, which I deem to be a bit better than ace-8, ace-7, ace-6. We get the 4-bet is call. We have a queen 4 board. I'm going to go ahead and range bet this small. A lot of my range is not that good here. I don't really have any queen X in this particular scenario except for quad queens. But ace queen hands were not used as bluff hands in this scenario. Maybe he knows that. Maybe he doesn't. I don't know. Upper left-hand table is interesting. We isolated the limper and then range bet jack 6-6 two-tone small. Now we get donked into on the turn for a half-pot bet. We've got the gut shot and the nut flush blocker, so I'm going to go ahead and peel against this and evaluate on the river. We get the small bet called by the aggressive player on queen 4. We peel a 6 of clubs. I would go ahead and jam all in with my flush draws. I think I would jam my flush draws for the most part. I would be trapping my queens. I don't really have a ton of value. I think I'd actually I might not even jam my flush draws here. I might be checking back to trap with my quad queens, checking back to underwrap my aces, kings, and jacks, and then checking back my ace-8, ace-7, ace-6, ace-jack offsuit, and ace-king, both versions. I think I can go ahead and check range here, actually, all things considered. The ace is a pretty good card for me now. I'm going to fold the ace-queen high here against that double donk, the check call, donk turn, donk river line from the fish. Now on the river, on this lower right-hand table 4-bet pot, I've got aces full, I've got quad queens, I've got ace-queen, or ace-king rather, is top pair, top kicker. I've also got a bunch of other ace-X type hands like ace-8, ace-7, ace-6, and the ace-jack offsuit, my actual holding in the hand, as well as kings and jacks. It makes me almost think that a hand like jack should be turned into a bluff. I'm obviously going to be value betting the aces and the queens, the quad queens, the aces full. I think I would bet ace-king. Whether I can actually value bet ace-jack is the question here, whether he calls me down with enough stuff that's actually beat. Very, very questionable. I think I'm going to take my showdown here. It's close, but I'm going to check it back. Against pocket nines, I don't know that I get that much value. Upper right-hand table, I isolated the under-the-gun limper. He's a wreck. We get called by another short stack, and the limp player limp calls. We flop middle set. I'm going to go ahead and bet that out small on jack 7-4. We get check raised all in, so we're going to be happy to call off with our set here. He's against 10 jack, drawing essentially dead. Upper right-hand table, we raise first in from middle position with ace-jack. That ace-jack 4-bet pot, I'm still not sure if I really should be value betting that or checking back. I'm trying to think here. I'm so short on bluffs. I'm not even sure I really try to bluff. I'm not even sure a hand like Jack should be bluffed to try to fold him off a hand like some kind of ace, some kind of ace X hand that check called the flop that probably doesn't fold. And king should probably also be checked back too. Now that said, that doesn't mean I shouldn't be value betting just because I'm short on bluffs. I still want to value bet if my hand can be called by worse often enough. Just I'm somewhat worried about some kind of queen X being trapped, or even a hand like ace king. Although ace king should really be shipped in pre-flop. I don't know. I'm on the fence. Maybe it's okay to check back those weaker ace X hands that were in my 4-bet bluff range pre-flop. Those middle suited aces that rivered top pair. Maybe ace jack should have been a value bet. Just force him to make a decision with a hand like pocket tens, pocket nines. I think it's pretty close. I'm even now thinking about it longer. I'm still not sure. Now I'm leaning a bit towards maybe I should have just tried to jam him all in there. It's hard for me to rep bluffs just because my bluffs for the most part are going to be ace-x hands pre-flop, and now those hands actually have a decent bit of showdown value. I don't really have bluffs that aren't pairs in that situation anymore. But as I said, that's not a reason to not value bet just because I'm short on bluffs. You still value bet even if you can't find the bluffs. You just value bet your hands that can still be called and figure out a way to have bluffs if you even need to. Upper right-hand table, the recreational player limps the button. We'll complete the small blind with ace-9 offsuit. And then we're going to fold against that big blind who makes a pretty large isolation range. Lower right-hand table, 6-4 suited is a bit outside my standard open range. We have a fishy player in the small blinds who's reasonably deep, so I'm going to go ahead and expand my range, even if ever so slightly, to include 6-4 suited. It hand's right on the cusp of a standard open anyway, so it's not that big a deviation. You could probably have it in there a large portion of the time. Lower left-hand table, limp pot. The guy bets full pot. We're going to go ahead and check fold with nothing but some weak backdoor draws. Upper right-hand table, a recreational player raises first in from the cutoff. He's been passive, so I won't go at him quite as loose, but I'll still go at him roughly 10%, including an ace-queen offsuit hand. I will range bet the 6 high on the monotone queen 9-3 board against the flop check. We get called by the 3-bet on the Jack 9-7 rainbow board. That is not a great board for us to range bet, but I like to go ahead and do it anyway just because these guys still fold too much even though that board smacks so much of his continue range. I am still going to go ahead and use the small range bet. I can pick up straight draws, overcards for top pair that I feel pretty good about going with. And he will fold some of the time and probably not raise often enough. So even on a board like this, that small bet's not going to burn me too badly, though I think it's less valuable here against a recreational player on a board like this than most other situations I could find myself in. He goes ahead and check calls. We get a 6 of club on the turn. I could keep betting with my hands that have flush draws like ace-king, king-queen, king-10 of clubs. King-10 is going to be a good barrel hand anyway just because it's got the double gut shot. Queen-10's an open-ender that can still be in there. This is all trivia. Had he checked to me, which he did not do, he now donk bets the turn. A hand as weak as ace-queen high with no flush draw, not even a flush draw blocker. I am just going to go ahead and fold this. But those flush draw hands I was talking about betting, the hands like king-10, queen-10 would certainly be coming along. I don't really have any 8x in my range, but I would have lots of sets like jacks and nines, as well as the overpairs like aces, kings, and queens, and various top pair hands like ace-jack, king-jack, queen-jack, jack-10, suited versions, and ace-jack offsuit as well. Those would all be continues. Ace-queen off is a fine hand to fold here with so many better hands to continue with. Lower left-hand table will open the cutoff with queen-jack offsuit. A shorter stack player from the big blind that's also limped some in the first orbit who's a suspected wreck. He's going to call the big blind. He checks to us on queen 3 deuce rainbow. We're going to go ahead and range bet small. This hand will be checked back on some turns and bet on some turns depending on which turn card peels. Lower left-hand table, Jack 3, or lower right-hand table, I'm sorry, Jack 3 suited is just outside of a standard open range, but we have a passive fishy player in the small blind playing pretty deep, so I'm going to get in this pot, especially since it's not too far from a standard open. I would probably open Jack 4 as a standard, but not open Jack 3. And the reg has been reasonably aggressive and standard in the big blind, but nothing so much it's going to make me not want to start opening with the fish in the small blind as well. Ace, Queen, Jack, Rainbow. I will range bet small against the rec. Fold out a ton of his middle pairs that flat called and all kinds of weird middle connected cards or random suited cards that don't have a Ace, Queen, or Jack in them. Checking back pretty much every turn except for a Jack or perhaps a 3 if he check calls. Another suspected recreational player in this lower left-hand table. He open limps the button playing 44 blinds deep. We're just going to go ahead and check the big blind against him and that small blind completer. Another suspected rec playing 30 blinds deep. So this new table over here, the lower left-hand table, looks pretty promising thus far. We will check range on the Queen 9-5 rainbow board. Lower right-hand table, a recreational player limps under the gun. We will isolate him with something like our under the gun open range, which includes ace-queen offsuit in our roughly top 17% of hands. Lower left-hand table, the button limper bets 1 into 3. The small blind calls. I'm going to go ahead and also call that min bet with my top pair weak kicker. Lower right-hand table, we get check limp call. We have an ace-king 5 two-tone board. I will range bet small with my top pair. And he instantly calls. I'm going to continue checking the lower left-hand table when that king peels on the turn with my now second pair weak kicker. King is a lousy card on that lower right-hand table as his king X is now trips that never fold. So I'm going to go ahead and check back my ace and look to either bluff catch or value bet the river instead. I still beat all kinds of Broadway gut shots that didn't get there, 5X and weaker ace-X type hands. So I'm not that worried that he outdrew me just because of the trip kings, but I want to steer this hand into a line where it's going to play better as opposed to betting and calling off and, paying off trip kings a decent portion of the time. 5 pairs in the river, the lower left-hand table, so I'm just going to check and try to show this down or call a small river bet. Against that half-pot lead from the recreational player, there's nothing to do except just go ahead and call with ace-queen here. He ends up with Jack 8 suited, busted flush draw. That same lower right-hand table, we're now under the gun, and we raise first in with the ace-king offsuit. Upper left-hand table, we check the big blind against a limper and small blind completer with king 3 suited. Lower upper right-hand table, the recreational player limps blind down blind. We check in with our Jack 7. We're now going to go ahead and stab for half pot with our second pair. Lower right-hand table, I'm going to check range against an in-position and out-of-position player on the 7-5-5 two-tone board with our ace-king high. And I will just fold king 3 against the bet and the call on queen 4 and 4 in the upper left-hand table. Upper right-hand table, I'm going to check my 7 back now with that 9 peeling on the turn. Lower right-hand table, I'm going to go ahead and start stabbing on that 7-5-5-4 board with my ace-king high with the flush draw blocker. We get a large bet from that player that check calls in that limped blind on blind pot. He's a recreational player, so we don't like to fold showdown value too much, but let me think about this a bit more just because he used a larger bet size. And I don't want to 3-bet and have to fold to a jam on the lower right-hand table against a fishy passive player, so I'm going to go ahead and just call with queen 10 suited, even though it's off an 8th preflop 3-bet. And let's see here. The check call check bet line from Fish is slightly overbluffed. Let me see here. I think this is close enough we can go ahead and call it down, even though he's going to have some kind of king X hand an awful lot. And it's close against the Rex I call. Would have been more of a slam dunk call against something more like a half pot or even 2/3 type bet. Lower right-hand table, he checked back the flop, and now we turn queens and 10s on 9-9-10 queen, with the backdoor flush draw showing up on the turn. I'm going to go ahead and bet this small to try to get called down by queen X, some kind of weird Jack X hand, some kind of flush draw. he quickly calls, and now there's 4 to the straight out there. I'm going to be much more content to just try to check down my queens and tens and not try to bluff him off a trip 9 or some kind of straight that involves a king or an 8, or maybe even ace king could be there for the the full blown straight, the 6-card straight, the nut straight. However, with the recreational player that goes check, call, bet after he raised pre-flop, and there's 4 to the straight out there, and he overbets about 1.5x pot, I'm almost certain that's going to be a fold. These overbets tend to be less bluffy. The 4-card straight rivers tend to be less bluffy. The check, call, bet line is slightly less bluffy than average in that formation. All that adds up to a fold, just thinking there's going to be so much king X in his range, or perhaps even some kind of full house hands as well. Upper left-hand table, we open pocket 4s from the cutoff. We get called on the big blind by a player that seems to be a loose regular type. We're going to go ahead and range bet on the ace-9-6 rainbow board. I'm also going to shuffle this table as it doesn't seem very fishy at this point. Upper right-hand table, we open 6-7 suited from the button. Turn is a 5. We can have 8-7 suited. We can have aces, 9s, 6s, and 5s. We can have ace-9 offsuit. We can have ace-6 and ace-5 suited. We probably don't have too much 9-6 suited, but we would have 6-5 suited. There's a lot of hands we can be value betting here for a large size. I don't think he necessarily has much more 7-8 offsuit than we do. We don't really have any, but he shouldn't have very much from the big blind either. He should not have aces or really even 9s pre-flop. He should check raise a lot of the 9s and 6s that he does have on the flop. He should not really be check calling with the pocket 5s. This all adds up to an overbet or check situation for me. In addition to the strong hands that be overbet, as well as some of my good top pairs like ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack, perhaps even ace-10, I can be betting various hands like club draws, especially club draws with an 8 like king-8, 10-8. Queen 8, Jack 8 type hands, some King 7 type hands, and I was checking back the 4s obviously anyway. He goes ahead and bets the river real small. There's some merit to actually raising this, just he doesn't have a 7x hand there very often. I have hands like 9-7, 6-7, ace-7. I'm going to go ahead and turn this into a bluff for a pot size bet against that small river bet right there. I think he's just trying to show down something weak or stab at me because I timed out on the turn. Had he bet larger, I would just give him credit in full. But that little weak river bet is just so many weak hands that don't want to show any real desire for the pot if you make them put more money in. So you can get away with that a lot. Upper right-hand table, we raise first in from middle position, and then we get raised in position by a regular player with 8-10 suited. Fine, you just go ahead and fold that. That's one of our first raise first in hands in that spot, and there's no reason to be defending for calls very aggressively out of position against a 3-better. Even if we thought this guy was sufficiently aggressive over, I'm going to start defending at full GTO as opposed to a tighter pool-oriented defense range. A hand like 8-10 suited is still going to be a standard fold. Lower left-hand table, we have evidence of yet another recreational player because this guy's limping under the gun, playing 77 blinds deep. We will complete our small blind with Jack-Queen offsuit, kind of on the cusp of a raise or call type hand in that spot. You could raise it as well. I tend to be a bit more reserved in these isolation from the blind scenarios, but raising's not bad. Everybody checks around the flop. I'm going to go ahead and start stabbing here as people haven't shown too much likelihood to have an ace having everybody check the flop. I can get called on the turn, but a lot of hands will fold the river that blank out. It's a 4-straight board as well as a flush closing river, so I'm going to go ahead and use a pot-size bet. Try to fold them off hands like 8-9 that called the turn. I don't like that he's thinking about it. I would like to see a very quick fold from the recreational player, but I think it's okay to go ahead and stab at that turn when nobody's showing any initiative on the flop, and then also go ahead and follow through on the river. There's a lot of those turn 1-pair hands are now going to fold when you show some more aggression. He, of course, goes ahead and raises my pot-sized bet, so I'm going to give him credit for either a flush or a 6 here. Obviously not calling with queen high and not going to do any kind of crazy rebluff against a recreational player that's raising my river bet for a min raise. So we're just going to go ahead and fold. We lost the pot, but I think we played a very reasonable way right there. And he was, in fact, bluffing me with the 5x type hand. So he was more aggressive than I gave him credit for. I guess that small size might have been something of a clue that we would have used a larger size with the value type hand in most, but not all cases. But it's okay to fold. It's okay to get bluffed on the river occasionally, even by a fish. And if anything, he had the better hand than me, so it's not like I can go ahead and call him down. The only choice is to go ahead and rebluff a guy like that, and that's not going to be profitable against fish that are raising river bets very often, even though it would have been in that particular scenario, as he likely folds if I reship. Recreational player to my immediate right on this upper hand table based on the small blind limp in the blind v blind situation and the 50 blind stack. We'll go ahead and tag him. Upper left-hand table, we get a raise first in for middle position. A fishy player calls on the button. I'm going to be using a larger size to treat this almost like a cold 4-bet or fold situation with a pretty healthy number of raise fold type hands just for the sizings that are involved. Ace-10 offsuit, of course, is not going to be a part of that, though. I want large suited Broadway cards that will play well if I do get called in this pot, where I can flop either good top pairs in addition to some good big draws that I can go with. So I'd rather have the suited cards on that spot, with the exception of maybe ace-queen offsuit type hands are going to be okay to mix in there. But ace-10 just a bit too weak. I'll have far too many hands in my range if I'm raising hands as weak as that. 10-8 offsuit's a bit outside of standard raise from the button. However, given the pool's tendencies towards being a bit too passive, I'll go ahead and expand my range even if ever so slightly to include that hand. These regs have 3-bet some on their chances so far, but still, this guy's only 3-bet 6 or 7%, and this guy's only played 2 hands. We don't know anything about him. So I'll just default to what the pool does in general, which means they're going to be too passive, which means I can raise my button a bit looser than is standard. And 10-8 suited is kind of on the cusp of a standard open to begin with anyway, so I think that's a fine hand to open there. Lower right-hand table, we raised the cutoff with King-9 suited, part of our 27-28% raise first in range. We get called by a recreational player in the big blind who checks to us on 7-4-4 two-tone, so we're going to go ahead and range bet him small. Lower left-hand table, a button player with about 40 blinds open limps. We're going to tag him as a recreational, but we're going to fold now our big blind when the small blind isolates him up to a 5-blind raise. Blind on blind, lower left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and raise with our ace-4 suited. A standard raise first in range will probably be about 45%, but given the big blinds are awful passive in these pools in general, we can raise a lot more than that. Ace-4 suited is going to be a raise no matter what, though, in that spot. Upper left-hand table, small blind limps in. We check back King-Deuce opposite. We're going to check back on Ace-King-Jack two-tone. Upper right-hand table, we're going to 3-bet our big blind against a button 3x raise first in, roughly a 15% range, including King-Queen suited, and we're going to go ahead and check call with Ace-4 suited, no backdoor flush draw on the blind battle on the lower left-hand table, and check again on the offsuit 3 that completes the rainbow. Upper left-hand table, I'm going to go ahead and stab now with my King on the Ace-King-Jack-7 two-tone board, looking to either fold out or charge some hands like Jack X, Queen X, 10X that has some equity. And I'm going to get 1-bet in against an Ace X hand anyway there in almost all run out, so I don't mind betting the turn to check back the river with my weak King. Upper right-hand table, we're going to open Jack-7 suited on the button. Upper left-hand table, open 4-3 suited, blind down blind. A bit questionable with the guy playing 30 blinds deep, but probably still okay. We'll check range to him on Queen-Jack-6. And we're going to check fold to the second barrel on the lower left-hand table. Upper right-hand table will range bet on the ace-7-5 two-tone board. Upper left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and start stabbing with our 4-high on Jack-6, Queen, Jack-6, Queen, Jack board. Lower right-hand table, we get a small blind limp, blind on blind. We're going to isolate him with the ace-9 offsuit towards the bottom. Actually, no, we can isolate a lot of hands there, probably 40-45%, maybe a bit tighter because he's so short, but ace-9 is still fine. Upper right-hand table, we peel a jack turn. We can have aces, jacks, sevens, fives. He shouldn't have aces or jacks pre-flop. He shouldn't have too much sevens or fives on the flop, as it should be check raised. We can have ace-jack. We can have ace-7 and ace-5. We can even have jack-7 suited. We can have 7-5 suited. I'm going to go ahead and use overbets here along to go with all the various flush draws and combo draws and 6-8 type hands we can have. Best river cards for us are obviously cards that fill us up. Next best cards are going to be hands that do not complete any flushes on our low cards, probably like 2s, 3s, and 4s. I'm just not that worried about him having those low connected cards to make a straight in this particular line. If I fill up, I'll probably be overbetting for value. If I get a brick, I'll probably be betting a more standard 2/3-ish type size for value. On bad cards, I will check back. Let's see here. Upper right-hand table, face a 3x raise first in from a tight, fishy player. He's only sitting on 37 blinds. I'm going to have to really just 3-bet this to either fold the verse jams or call off verse jams, and I don't want to have too many folds for that particular size. And I think against, even though he's been passive, he's so short, I can do that with jacks or better. That said, I really can't have queen 10 suited in my range as a raised fold hand because I will have far too many raised folds if I do. So I'm just going to go ahead and fold this against a guy who is playing a more standard size and standard opening frequencies. I would go ahead and just 3-bet him there with queen 10 suited. But against that tight, fishy player that's short, where it's really almost like a 4-bet or fold situation once I raise, I need to be more cautious with which hands I go ahead and 3-bet him with. And I'm going to fold my queen 10 suited to keep me from being too exploitable to reships. Lower right-hand table, I range bet after isolating the limper and getting called by the big blind on the queen 9-9 rainbow flop. On the 8 turn that brings a backdoor flush draw, I can keep betting my flush draws, my 9x type hands, my jack 10 straights. I can keep betting various flush draws and combo draws like king 10, king jack. I can keep betting some queen x hands, though I think I'd largely check those back. I think I'd rather be betting queen 9 and queen 10 as it blocks the straight than and check back my ace king, ace queen. King 10 is just a bit too weak to do anything with. There's not too much going for it, so I'm going to go ahead and check that back and perhaps bluff the river if he doesn't show any initiative. When he goes ahead and bets half pot, though, I'm obviously not calling with king high. If I had some better removal, I might consider bluff raising against that particular size, just as that sizing and that line tends to be pretty weak from fish. The board texture doesn't tell me there's a whole lot of hands in his range that, like brick draws that could have check called the flop and now turned themselves into bluffs in the river that would be auto folds against a raise. So I'm probably not going to be bluff raising a whole lot of hands here. And even if I were, I want some kind of heart in my hand and blocker to the various straights that are out there. A hand like king 6 is just not in consideration for any kind of wacky special play. He had ace king, so he was pretty weak and probably could have folded to a lot of bluff raises, but I'd rather have better removal since I don't want to bluff raise too much against a fish, even against spots where I think he might be somewhat weak, based on his sizing and line. I still, even though I will bluff raise him some because of that, like I said, I want to have better removal to one get me more folds, block the hands that are clearly calling for value, block his strongest possible hands, and also control my frequencies so I'm not just bluff raising far too much in case I'm against a guy that's just not folding marginal hands, like, perhaps he doesn't even fold ace king high in that spot. You never know. So I don't want to be too wacky with my bluff raises against a fish, but I will consider having them in certain situations. Lower left-hand table, we open King-Queen offsuit from the cutoff. Lower left-hand table doesn't seem to be particularly fishy. We'll go ahead and shuffle that one out. The other tables all have some degree of promise. Upper right-hand table has a confirmed rec to my right, a suspected rec to my left, playing 38-13 on 30 blinds over 8 hands. Lower left-hand table will open 7s under the gun. Upper right-hand table, we have a direct position on a rec. And the lower right-hand table, we have 2 guys we've already tagged as recs and 2 more players playing short with position on all of them, and a player who's been on the passive side to our immediate left, so that's an excellent table. That lower left-hand table does have a guy playing on a 27 blind stack, but he's been tight. He hasn't been limping or playing any hands through the first orbit or 2. Other than that, the table's not very promising, so we can shuffle that out and look for something better. Lower right-hand table, we've got Queen-Jack offsuit under the gun. That is a little bit, sort of on the cusp, a little bit tight, a little bit looser than a standard open would be for me. But we've got a fish in the big blind. The in-position players haven't been too aggressive. I mean, this guy's been fishy, but I'm not that worried about him playing 30 blinds deep. The 30 blind player in the small blind is probably also a fish. I'm okay to expand my range ever so slightly here. I'm really trying to target this big blind that we've got direct position on here that could call because he's been a clear rec playing 62-14 with 47% limps over 70 hands. Upper right-hand table, recreational player limps the button. Another recreational player completes the small blind. We check our big blind with our 8-3 offsuit. We get min bet on the turn after the flop checks around. It's a 7-Jack-8 rainbow flop with the 5 put in the backdoor flush draw up there on the turn. We have second pair facing a 1/3 size little stab on the turn. I'm just going to go ahead and call that. We're ahead of too many various draws, 6x or gut shot type hands to fold second pair even with the weak kicker in that spot. Now when we face a small raise and the quick call, I'll go ahead and get out of the way as our hand just doesn't have very many good cards for us outside of specifically another 8. And we're probably behind, or at least, against, in the times we're not behind, at least one player, if not both, has very good equity against our middle pair. So it's fine to go ahead and fold that turn once the recreational player raises. Lower right-hand table, we check range on 5-4-3 with the caller both in and out of position to us, and then we fold facing a 2/3 bet from a regular type player in position with a very weak holding, just some naked overcards. Upper right-hand table, it's a blind battle with a very tight passive blind so far, so we're going to go ahead and expand our range and try to rob him with King-3 offsuit. This is not a standard open, but it's not too unreasonable, especially when the blinds appear to be very tight and will just not raise us enough and fold too much. I'd like to go ahead and just try to rob those guys if they've been passive. He's been 15-15 over 27 hands with no 3 bets, so he's definitely slanting a bit more cautious or conservative. On the turn, after we check range on the flop, we now peel a 10, so it's 6-Queen, Ace, 2-tone flop with a 10 that completes a possible Broadway draw. We've got essentially the nut flush bluff draw blocker if that flush comes in, as well as a Broadway draw and Broadway blocker. I'm going to go ahead and use this as an overbet hand. I can have King-Queen suited, I can have King-Jack suited and offsuit for the nut straight. I can have various sets like aces, 6, 10s, and 6s, or aces, queens, 10s, and 6s. I can have ace, queen, ace, 10, ace, 6. I can have all versions of queen 10. I can have a lot of queen 6. I'm going to go ahead and continue barreling this river just because I've got such good removal. I think he's going to call with a lot of ace-x hands. for a smaller bet, but I think a larger bet can fold a nitty type player off. So I'm going to go ahead and use a 2x overbet, especially because I've got a blocker to that straight. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to bluff him off. I would also be definitely liking to do that if the spade peel on the river is I've got essentially the best card to bluff a 3-spade run out with the ace being on the board and the ace of spades having plenty of showdown value, if not value bet potential. So I was going to be pretty much barreling just about any river that hit. Maybe not the king, and maybe I would just give up on the king and hope to check my king down against a weaker card that called the turn. But I'd either be bluffing or value betting if I had hit my straight in that particular spot. Upper left-hand table, recreational player limps middle position. I'm going to go ahead and isolate him with something like my 27, 28-ish% cutoff raise first in range, which includes queen 7 suited towards the bottom. Lower right-hand table, we've got a 50 blind stack, raises first in for 3x. I'm going to go ahead and treat this like almost like a cold 4-bet or fold spot. I'm going to stack off with jacks or better against this guy. And I'm going to 3-bet him with a roughly 50-50 value bet to bluff range. And king 10 suited is just outside the range of hands I'm going to do that with. It's pretty close. If you wanted to go ahead and 3-bet him and fold to a jam, that wouldn't be too bad either, but I think it's slightly too loose to do it. But it's very much on the cusp. But I think raising to stack off with jacks or better and ace-king is the way to go there. You could maybe talk me into tens, but I'm not sure about that. He's short, so he's not going to punish you too badly with better pairs all that often. We just don't know that much about his pre-flop aggression tendencies, only having played 4 hands with him so far. This is the first hand that he's raised. Lower right-hand table, we'll open ace-9 suited from middle position, roughly a 22% raise first in range, including all of the suited aces. Lower right-hand table, pocket 7s is a raise first in under the gun. Upper left-hand table, we get a 3x open from the cutoff, and then a recreational player calls in the small blind. Even with the extra player calling, it's going to be a fine hand to defend with, and the fact that he's fishy makes that all the more reasonable. We're going to go ahead and defend this for a call, not a 3-bet. Or check range on the 10-9-8 two-tone board. I'd love to see the in-position player check back. If he bets large, I feel less good about my prospects in this going forward, even though I do have top pair right now. I just don't think that he's betting multi-way with the fish in the pot on a board that coordinated, all that light. The smaller flop bet, however, is not that concerning. I'm going to go ahead and call this. The recreational player also called behind. But against that just 1/3 flop bet, I'm getting about 5-1 on my flop call. Nothing to do but go ahead and call there. You can't even consider folding for that kind of price with top pair. The queen is not a great card for us, and that now there's 4 to the straight out there, and the regular player continues barreling with 2 players in the pot that called the flop. He's probably got a lot of Jack X in his range, and in the bluffs are just going to be some flush draws. I think it's hard for him to find a ton of bluffs in that spot. His only flush draws that aren't pairs are going to be ace-king suited, or then small flush draws. Even a hand like 6-7 flop the straight and still has the low end to the straight. That might not even be bet because it's got showdown value. I'm going to be content to go ahead and fold this now with that 4 to the straight out there. A jack does give me the absolute nut straight, but I don't really like calling for gut shots to very obvious straights out of position for pretty healthy size bets, especially when a player's line implies a decent bit of strength to me right there. So I'm going to go ahead and fold my king 10 on that turn. I don't think that's too close. I don't think that's too controversial. I think that's just a fine way to play that hand, even though we have to check fold some degree of equity on the turn. I think it's going to be more profitable than coming along and calling. Lower left-hand table, blind on blind, faced a raise first in, and we're going to be defending with most of our suited combos, including queen 7 suited. Upper left-hand table, we have what appears to be a post. We're going to isolate from the blinds with king 9 suited. This could be towards the bottom of our isolation range. Lower left-hand table in the blind battle, we face a 1/3 bet on 10-10 deuce rainbow board. We've got queen high with the backdoor flush draw on a board that doesn't have too much going on, so I'm just going to go ahead and float that at least once. Two players called, the small blind and the posting player in the upper left-hand table, so we're not going to bet. We're going to check range out of position on the ace-5-4 board. Upper right-hand table, we're going to bet range against the big blind who called our cutoff raise first in on 10-10-9 two-tone. We get double-barreled having picked up the flush draw on the jack of clubs in the lower left-hand table blind battle, so I'm going to go ahead and call that. And we backed into a flush, which is wonderful. I cannot credibly rep a 2 here with 2 players in this pot, so I'm just going to continue checking and not stab at that with the king-9 in the upper left-hand table. The board double pair in the upper right-hand table means my ace-king high has plenty of showdown, so I'm going to go ahead and check this back. And we end up against king-9, which is a reasonable way to play that hand. I'm going to go ahead and try to bet 2/3 for value here. No, I think I can go ahead and overbet this. I can rep some backdoor straight draws that didn't get there. I don't think he can fold a 10x or a jack x type hand, so I'm going to go ahead and just overbet this, try to get some extra value out of it. And I'm going to check fold the king high on that 4 straight board against the short stack on the upper left-hand table. A check raise all in this blind battle would be pretty gross. I probably have to call it down because my hand is so strong, but his range would also be super strong in that particular line as well. You know, with full houses or higher backdoored flushes, I don't know that he check raises a worse flush all in or a bluff. He's tanking. He folds, but that's okay. When I back into a hand as strong as that, I want to try to get a lot of value out of it, especially blind on blind, where players get a bit sticky and seem like they're getting a little bit more sticky as the pool gradually evolves. Two X raise first in from the cutoff, a half stack recreational player flats on the button. There's some merit to calling a hand like this. This is a bit outside of a standard call against a 2x raise first in. However, when you've got that recreational player in there and I'm closing the action, I think it's okay to be a little on the loose side, you know, and just try to hit some kind of shady straight or 2 pair and get out of the way if I don't. We can go ahead and fold versus the 3x open in the blind battle from a short stack that's been on the tighter passive side. In the upper right-hand table, upper left-hand table, we raise middle position first in with king-jack suited, and we go ahead and check range against a player in and out of position on the queen 8-4 two-tone. 10 of diamonds puts a possible flush shot there, but also gives us an open-ended straight draw, and nobody's shown any love for that pot on the flop. So we're going to go ahead and start stabbing at it on the turn with our semi-bluff. Probably follow through a lot of rivers as well. In position player calls us. I think he mostly bets his flush draws on the flop and or raises them on the turn when they're made. He can call down with a lot of hands that have showdown value for a smaller bet, but not against an overbet all in. He's got a little more than 2x pot. We're going to make him call off the rest of his stack here with our busted draw. We can have sets and flushes legitimately in our range as well. I think he's got so much nonsense like 10-9, 8-9, queen-jack that just doesn't really love facing that big river bet, but can call a smaller bet that I think using the overbet bluff size there has a lot of merit. I'd like it more with the diamond blocker, but sometimes the blocker is not the most important thing. You know, assessing what hands he will call against various sizes probably is more important than even the removal. But of course, that's an even stronger play if I've got a large diamond blocker as well. Lower left-hand table, we raise first in the cutoff with ace-10 offsuit, which is fairly standard. Upper left-hand table, we had a button limper, small blind completion, checks to us on the flop. We check range on Jack 4-4 Rainbow, 7 turn. After it checks around, the small blind leads. We have no real equity, just an overcard, so we're content to go ahead and fold. We might start stabbing that turn with nobody showing any interest in the pot, either pre-flop or on the flop, and the small blind player checking the turn had that happen. But when the small blind player leads, nothing to do but just go ahead and fold. A tight, fishy player. He's playing 64-14 over 81 hands. He raises first in from the button. Against the small blind, or on the small blind, against a button raise first in, I would typically 3-bet about 15%. The 9-8 suited would often be in there, towards the very bottom of the range. Given this guy's been so tight and well, he hasn't been tight. He's been loose with his limps, but with his raises, he's been tight and fairly passive. I'm not going to 3-bet a standard range against that guy. I'm going to get a bit tighter, which means a hand like 9-8 suited at the bottom of my 3-bet range in a general standard situation now becomes a fold. You can also fold a bit tighter because of this 30-blind fishy player behind me in the big blind that might just go ahead and jam random nonsense for whatever reason, because those guys do. And I don't want to get myself into a spot where I have to raise and then call off 30-some blinds with 9 high. So I think that's another reason that would justify being tighter and folding that hand. Although even if this player was a standard full-stacked regular player with either GTO tendencies or typical player pool aggression tendencies, I think I would still be folding 8-9 suited against the button open, just because this player has been so reserved with his raise first in thus far. Over 82 hands, enough to make a very real conclusion about his pre-flop tendencies. Lower left-hand table, blind on blind, we're going to raise ace-10 suited first in. And we are going to go ahead and check range on 9-8-7 Rainbow. Now that we pick up a 3 of clubs to give us both the open-ended straight draw and the flush draw, I'm going to start betting, and I've got so many cards that give me a very strong hand on the river, I'm going to go ahead and use the overbet size here. Upper right-hand table, we're going to range bet on ace-7-3 after raising first in from the button. And the upper left-hand table, we're going to go ahead and isolate the under-the-gun limper with 8-10 suited, which is going to be towards the bottom of my isolation range. Now this player goes ahead and he calls us. I think he can continue calling me with a lot of decent one-pair hands like 9-10, 9-jack, 8-10, 8-8-6 sort of things. So I don't want to go ahead and use a small bet. I want to use a large bet here. I could have Jack-10 or the various sets in this line legitimately, whether he knows that or not. So I'm going to go ahead and overbet this guy. Upper right-hand table, after the player limp calls, I'm going to go ahead and range bet small on the Jack-Queen-6 two-tone board. I continue betting a lot of turns, especially if I pick up diamonds or hit a 9 for the second nut straight. Lower right-hand table, a recreational player limps the blinds, playing about 70 blinds deep. We can isolate from the button reasonably aggressively, something like a standard button open range, low to mid-40s. 10-9 offsuit's a part of that, towards the bottom, but a reasonable hand to isolate with here against the limper. You could also check it back if that was your preference, but I think isolating here, not so much in isolation, but raising that limper is going to be fine. On 8-3 deuce, that does not hit his limp calling range all that very hard. I can go ahead and barrel this. I do also have the 3-card pivot to the straight, so I can pick up a lot of straight draws on the turn, on jacks or 7s specifically, but also 6s and queens as well for gut shots, or 9s or 10s make me top pair. The 3 of hearts, however, doesn't do a whole lot for me. I would continue betting my overpairs, my 3x type hands. 2's full, 8's full I might trap, quad 3's I might trap. You know, and then I could also have various heart draws, hands like 4-5, 5-6, ace-4, ace-5 to bet as draws. I don't need to be betting a hand like 10-9. I can check that back to peel a top pair and either bluff catch or value bet the river, or I can go ahead and bluff with it if he checks the river and I brick out. Against that half pot lead, just no decision here to do anything but go ahead and call that. No point in raising, no point in folding. Run into ace-3 for trip 3's top kicker, but I think that was played very reasonably by myself, and even even somewhat reasonable by the fishy player as well. At least post-flop. I don't really do the whole limp calling thing pre-flop too much, but the post-flop play was fine. Lower left-hand table, we open middle position with queen 10 suited. We get called by the big blind, a regular type player, although a bit on the loose side. He checks to us on 9-3 deuce two-tone, so we're going to go ahead and range bet. We do have overcards and the flush draw. That turn is an offsuit jack, so we now have the open-ended straight draw. We can have jacks, nines, and really even threes and deuces for all the sets. We can have jack nine suited for two pair. You know, he shouldn't have all of these. A lot of the sets should be raised on the flop. We can also have the overpairs in hands like ace jack, king jack, queen jack. This to me is an overbet or check situation. The open-ended straight and flush draw is going to be a fine hand to go ahead and overbet as we have so much equity. And it also sets us up to win a nice large pot if one of our cash cards peels off. The lower upper left-hand table has been a limp pre-flop pot that checked all the way around. I'm going to go ahead and just sort of stab the river with my 8 high. If people don't have aces or kings, I mostly pick this pot up. Everyone quickly folds, and I win a pot with 8 high when I otherwise shouldn't have by stabbing at the river. So I think that's pretty reasonable. Lower left-hand table, we open 5s under the gun and take it down pre-flop. Lower right-hand table, a recreational middle position player limps. Ace-9 offsuit would be in my cutoff raise first in range, but not in my isolation range from the cutoff with the limper out there. It's probably a bit too loose. I have a bit too many hands to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and fold that one. We have a player limping behind on the button. He's been 18-13 with no limps over 45 hands. He's probably just limping speculative hands behind the recreational player's limp. I don't think that makes him a fish inherently. I still wouldn't really limp hands behind the fish. I would isolate, but some otherwise reasonable regular types players certainly do limp behind fishy limpers with suited connectors, smaller middle pairs, trying to make some kind of very strong hand for cheap in position, which is not an unreasonable way to play it and doesn't automatically make me think this guy is a fish. So we will not tag this guy as a fish, even though he did limp pre-flop. Lower left-hand table, we'll raise the button first in with ace-6 suited. And this table does not seem very fishy, but I'm going to shut the session down very shortly, so I'm not going to bother trying to shuffle the table out. Big blind goes ahead and 3-bets us, and 3-bets us pretty large. If I thought this guy was sufficiently aggressive to justify a GTO defense, I would go ahead and call this. However, the regular player pool is not sufficiently aggressive to justify it, and this guy's been 12-6 over 17 hands with no 3-bets, and this is now his first 1 in 8 opportunities. If anything, he is even tighter than the typical player in the pool, which makes this an even easier fold. So I'm going to go ahead and lay that one down. The sizing's also a smidge on the large size, which also makes me want to be a bit tighter. Lower right-hand table, we raise middle position first in with 9 jack suited. Upper left-hand table against an under-the-gun raise and a fishy middle position call. We just go ahead and fold 10-8 suited on the cutoff. No need to squeeze up there with the hand that weak. You get called by the recreational player in the big blind on the lower right-hand table, so we'll go ahead and range bet after his check on ace, queen, 7, rainbow. We've got some cards we can pick up that give us equity that would justify us barreling. And, cards like the kings, 10s, or 8s, especially of hearts. Any heart gives us a flush draw. That gives us a gut shot. We can continue having aces, queens, 7s, or pocket 8s. He really shouldn't have aces or queens pre-flop. He could have 7s or 8s as play. We could have ace-queen, but he probably could too as well. That said, I think I can still have a bit of a nut advantage here. I can also have hands like ace-king, ace-8 suited, ace-7 suited. This is close between an overbet and a 2/3 bet. There's also rainbow, and given he can have 7s or 8s, it's close. I'm going to use the smaller size here. Upper left-hand table, I'm not going to stab at the turn as I've got second pair and a decent spade. I'd rather the pot stay smaller with this kind of holding. I'm not going to fold, even though that pot size bet from a passive fishy player who's been passive both pre-flop and post-flop signifies some strength, strength in the respect that he probably has a lot of kings in his range, not necessarily strength in that he's got 2 pair sets and flushes automatically. But I think I can still go ahead and call this, given that I've got some showdown value if I can check through to the river on improved, or I've got all kinds of cards that I can use to improve, such as a spade, which gives me a 4 flush, which will often check down good here. I would probably fold queen 10 in that spot if I check the turn with it against that pot size bet against a player who's presumed to be strong. I'm going to check and see what he had. Yeah, he had king 3 of hearts, so he had a weak top pair with no kicker, no backdoor draw. So my assessment of the kind of hands that make up a large portion of his range turned out to be what he did actually have. It seemed to be pretty reasonable. And we called behind, but we had lots of equity. It was a reasonable hand to call, both with showdown value and some cards that can improve us as well with our 10 of spades. So I think that's pretty reasonable. And we are going to go ahead and shut down when these orbits complete. Lower right-hand table, blind on blind, king-queen opposite is a standard open. This player has been 20-14 over 49 hands, but no 3-bets, so I'd probably be expanding my range pretty wide based on his passive pre-flop tendencies over a fairly significant sample for an anonymous pool. King-queen, of course, is going to be part of that raise first in range, almost any situation, blind on blind. Upper left-hand table, we raise first in from middle position with ace-queen offsuit, and the upper right-hand table, we raise the button first in with pocket 6s. Both are pretty standard. We get kicked up from 2.5 to 6x by a 48-14 fish that's limped the third of his hand so far. Oh, upper right-hand table on the 9-3 deuce two-tone board against the big blind. We're gonna go ahead and range bet, facing that min raise, and then the four bet to 16.5. I'm just going to go ahead and fold my ace queen. I would be jamming here with queens plus ace king. I think is a pretty good way to go, and folding pretty much everything else, including ace queen offsuit. I feel like this guy's not going to be too weak as played because he's been so passive, and yeah, he had pocket aces. You know, this player who's 16-11 now over 19 hands is also probably not doing that too lightly against a fish that's short stacked as well. So there's no reason to put anybody in a particularly weak range there. His play to isolate against that fish with the pocket jacks is pretty reasonable. He's been so passive, I might not do it too much lighter than that. I think jacks plus ace king is fine for this guy to raise against, to get in against the fish. Pocket tens probably talk me out of doing it just because this guy's been so passive, even though he is so short. But I think his play is reasonable, all things considered, even though he ran into aces, and even though there's plenty of reason to think this guy's range is on the strong side. A couple more hands to go on our last table. Taking a look at session results, unless the last hand here that we're going to play on that table changes any things, we end up posting a very slight profit, essentially break even, but slightly profitable, both on cash one and all-in equity adjusted for the all-in pots. Let's take a look here at some other stats. We did not get to showdown very often. That's something we want to keep an eye on and make sure that we're not folding out too early or just not going deep enough into hands. We did win at showdown an awful lot. We didn't fold the river bets an extremely high percentage of the time. We also didn't 3-bet very aggressively pre-flop. We only 3-bet 4% pre-flop this session, which obviously is very, very low. Typically that's more up around 10%, although that's circumstantial and situational. I don't think we missed any very obvious 3-bets based on the way the session played out. Sometimes that kind of thing happens. And our river bets were getting through at a pretty high clip. Overall, I don't think there was any very glaring obvious mistakes, and the session was essentially break even. Regardless, what's all done now, I hope you enjoyed what you watched. This is Charlie Murphy signing off, and thank you for watching.